Good afternoon, subscribers, and particular welcome to my Year 10 students because this video is specially for you. And I'm going to run through 8 different things here which I have made a note of on this post-it note as I have been marking your essays. And these are things which you might have some of these in your answer, but you probably will not have all of them. And if you haven't got all of them, I want you to make sure that you make a note of all of them. So, let's get to it. So, number 1 point, which is something I have covered with you before, is to say that revenue is not the same as profit. So, let's remember that revenue, total revenue, is equal to price times quantity. Make sure you get a note of that equation. Whereas profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost. So, many of you are referring to profit when what you really mean is revenue. So you're talking about the fact that if a company such as Nissan specializes and sells more cars, then they will make more profit. Well, let's stick in this instance to revenues because we're not talking anywhere about costs. So we really need to just keep this on point here with reference to revenue. Okay, next point. Many of you have got a number of tip-top supply and demand diagrams, so congratulations for that. Do be careful on your labelling. Still, a number of you have mislabelled, so you've labelled the demand curve supply and the supply curve demand, so do be careful about that. But nice to see some great diagrams with regard to specialisation, increasing productivity and therefore shifting supply to the right, S1 to S2, and price falling P1 to P2, direction of travel, etc., etc. Now, the important thing here, ladies and gentlemen, is we have done for a number of weeks simply exercises whereby you draw the diagram and then you explain it in full. Well, that does not come to an end once we start essays. You must still draw the diagram and explain it in full. So it's this whole notion of explain in full, please, which we need to continue with. If you haven't done that, you need to either enhance your present detail in your explanation or write one from scratch. Okay, next point, number 3. How do we illustrate rising costs by way of a diagram for a firm? 1 or 2 of you have managed to do this successfully, but not that many of you. So S1, D1. Now the particular reference point here is that many of you have talked about the natural resources which firms use as inputs into the production process. They're going to run out because they're scarce and consequently they will be more pricey and that puts firms' costs up. Now the way to illustrate that, ladies and gentlemen, is that we start off here at equilibrium, P1, Q1, S1 and D1. Costs means that the supply will shift to the left. So increasing costs shifts the supply curve to the left or upwards. Consequently, price of the final product rises and quantity demanded and supplied reduces. So that's your diagram there, ladies and gentlemen. Point number 4. Not something we've mentioned, but this whole notion of labour being a derived demand. Now, other words for derived would be comes from. So the demand for shipbuilders comes from the demand for ships. The demand for homes comes from consumers. And let's think then about bricklayers who lay the bricks for the homes. Well, where does the demand for those bricklayers come from? It comes from the demand for homes. So this whole notion of a derived demand is very important. And just do learn that definition really of derived demand. The demand for the labour comes from the demand for the good or service that the labour is producing. Number 5. Many of you have talked about a lack of transferable skills. You talked about de-skilling. Again, highly relevant here. I've just been out with a number of sixth form students this morning where we met a number of people who were very specialised in the motor vehicle industry, particularly when it comes to answering phone calls and inquiries and queries about different models of cars. Now, one way in which companies can get around that is, of course, that they do something called job rotation. So rather than doing the same job day in, day out, which, as many of you have pointed out, could over time become monotonous and a little bit tiresome, well, your employer might rotate you around different areas and different business functions so that you maintain that interest, that enthusiasm, that motivation. So transferable skills, way to overcome it might be this notion of job rotation. Just as another aside point, ladies and gentlemen, number 6, you've got a question written in your exercise book. I always think it's good practice in the first paragraph to be defining the key terms, and to help you to do that, I would underline the key terms in the question. So the key terms in your question were specialisation, producers and workers. Number 7. Many of you referenced the fact that now that many production processes have become automated or there's a significant amount of division of labour, then as a consequence of that, if you get a breakdown at a junction there, that can cost the producer an enormous amount of money. And indeed, when we visited the Nissan factory a number of months ago, I don't remember the exact monetary value, but every 1 minute line, breakdown in the production line at Nissan, cost the firm something like £10,000. It's something astronomical per minute. And that's a big problem. So over-reliance on production line means that you've really got to make sure that your IT and all of your electronic automated vehicles are all running 24/7 optimally. Otherwise, a breakdown is going to be very costly. And then finally, this whole notion of comparative advantage. Not a term we've used before, so I'm introducing you to this at this point. Comparative advantage means that a country is relatively better at another country at a particular production process. So be that in the case of Nissan cars, we are relatively better at producing those cars. So countries generally tend to specialise in what they're good at. It's like you and I, we specialise in what we're good at. So you might go on to be a specialist in economics and you'll specialise in that area, and that'll be your area of comparative advantage, comparatively better than your peers at that particular task. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so those are the 8 things which I wish you to include in your DIT. Bye for now.